The Pope is supposed to be a bastion of chaste piety, but the only thing Pope John XII liked more than partying was women, which made his twisted death all the more fitting. Known as Octavian at birth, John was born to Alberic II, self-proclaimed Prince of Rome, and a woman that we're not entirely sure about. Future biographers aren't exactly kind to John, so the story of his birth has been twisted to make him seem extra evil. The story goes that John's mom may have been one of two people. She may have been an unnamed concubine of his dad's. Others, however, say his mom was Alda of Vienne, a woman Alberic married for the sake of political alliance. However, Alda of Vienne was Alberic's stepsister. Either way, John's life had some shady beginnings, and things only got worse from here. John's family had high hopes for the boy, and it showed in the name they chose for him. They called him Octavian, not just because it was the personal name of the first Roman emperor, Augustus Caesar, but because it was the name of an ancient Etruscan prince as well. John's family clearly expected him to leave behind a great and lasting dynasty. John eventually fulfilled this destiny, but probably not in the way that would make them proud. John likely didn't grow up being trained as a future priest. His dad more likely trained him in the art of combat, in the manner befitting Roman aristocrat nobles such as himself. However, this meant that book learning wasn't exactly on the top of John's list of priorities. He was essentially raised to be an ancient Roman equivalent of a frat boy, so it's not surprising that his future as the Pope was rife with problems. It wasn't long before John had his date with destiny. He was likely 16 years old when fever claimed the life of his father in 954. Shortly before this, John's father asked the nobles of Rome to swear an oath to him, promising the papal throne to John upon its vacancy. The nobles who loved John's father took the oath, sealing young John's fate. But the decision to give John the papacy quickly took a turn for the disastrous. Even for his time, John was incredibly young when he became the Pope. Unbelievably, he may have been as young as age 17 years old. To make things even trickier, he also inherited his father's position as Prince of Rome, which put a lot of prestige, power, and wealth into the hands of the teenager. It's absolutely no wonder then that it all quickly went to his head. This wouldn't be the story of a scandalous pope if it didn't include crazy accusations of his appetite in the bedroom. He apparently fornicated with any female who breathed in his general direction, including several widows, his father's mistress, and even disturbingly, his own niece. While we can't be sure if all of these accusations are true, the things we know he's actually done are even crazier. But to be fair to John, he did at least try to be good at his job. John tried to keep his life as a prince and his life as the Pope separate, in an effort to seem fair. Whenever he dealt with secular issues, he used the name Octavian, while any matters of the church, he went under his name John. It soon became clear to all involved, however, that John was a terrible prince and a terrible pope. He had a nasty habit of only looking out for one thing, himself, and it led to his first major failure. At around 960, John XII, a little too eager to show off his greatness, led an expedition against a couple of German duchies. He intended to take back land belonging to the Papal States, but the campaign was, as one biographer put it, quote, hastily planned and badly organized, quote. Unfortunately for John, he stood no chance against their combined forces, and his men fled north with their tail between their legs. For John, this must have been completely and utterly humiliating. Little did he know, however, even more humiliation awaited him just around the corner. Back at home, John's inexperience in spiritual and political matters severely handicapped him. While he was supposedly a smooth talker when it came to saving his own skin, his ability to play people against each other was severely lacking. Although John definitely tried to do so, and while he couldn't really influence the Roman nobles, he had just enough influence elsewhere to plunge Rome into complete turmoil. Under John XII's father, the varying, vicious factions within Rome had kept a low profile, but under John, they positively thrived. To make things even worse, John actively encouraged them to rampage through the Papal States. Why did he do this? Some speculate it was incompetence. Others believe that John did it just because he could. Either way, Rome's people did not see peace under Pope John XII's rule. But John himself certainly reaped many rewards at their expense. With money coming in from the church and the power of his position as an aristocrat at his fingertips, Rome became John XII's own personal playground. He kept his own guards handsomely paid, which kept John safe from attempts at his life. In the meantime, John bedded women left and right, giving his favorites money and land. He happily carried out his shenanigans for a time, but outside of Rome, a dark threat to his rule was looming. Rome had always been a magnet for invasions, and the fact that it was in utter disarray made it an even juicier target. Shortly after John's failed conquest, the King of Italy made his own attempts to take over Rome. As the king's men drew closer and closer, John grew increasingly desperate for help. Eventually, John cooked up a scheme that, like most of his plans, didn't exactly succeed. In 960, John sent for the aid of King Otto I of Germany. Otto was basically everything that John was not. While Otto had single-handedly united an entire kingdom, John deliberately divided his own people. While Otto was a beacon of virtue, John allegedly took offerings left behind by pilgrims in his cathedrals. Despite the unflattering comparisons, John knew full well that he needed Otto and his men, so when Otto agreed to meet him, John welcomed him into Rome with open arms. However, the aid came at a cost. Shortly before Otto entered Rome, the King of Italy met him in the field of battle in 961. The two clashed, and much to John's delight, Otto won. Otto continued on to Rome, where Pope John XII awaited in 962. John welcomed Otto with much enthusiasm, so much so that he promised to crown Otto emperor in return for his protection. For John, it should have been a brilliant political move, but unfortunately he made a fatal miscalculation. Otto may have saved them, but the citizens of Rome hated the idea of an outsider being welcomed into their home, and when you consider their history of being invaded over and over again, you can't exactly blame them. This meant that John's promise to make Otto an emperor probably made John even more unpopular with his people. Otto's feelings toward John didn't exactly make things easier either. Otto didn't trust John at all. During the coronation, he fully expected John to make an attempt on his life. But he needn't have worried. John proceeded to make a bunch of extravagant promises to Otto. He promised to never touch Otto's lands, never allow him to fall to injury, and to never provide aid to the King of Italy or his son. With all of that out of the way, John crowned Otto the Holy Roman Emperor. While this likely infuriated his fellow Romans, John truly believed he just made the deal of a century, for a very simple reason. You see, John didn't at all believe that crowning Otto gave him any actual power. The title of the Holy Roman Emperor, as far as John saw it, was an empty one. As the Pope, John held all the power, and Otto was merely another bodyguard. It didn't help that John, like his fellow Romans, looked down his nose at Otto's people and considered them barbarians. Now John spent the next while strengthening his new alliance with Otto, but apparently the way he went about it completely bewildered and confused Otto. On one hand, John almost seemed like he knew what he was doing, but on the other hand, John surrounded himself with yes-men and incompetent advisors, leading him to make decisions so baffling that Otto seriously suspected it all to be an act, even when he realized that no, John just really didn't know what he was doing. As someone much older and experienced than John, Otto tried to become something of a father figure for the younger man, and for a while, John almost turned things around. On February 12, 962, John convened a council in Rome at Otto's urging. During the council, John did several things that the Pope are generally expected to do. In other words, John actually for a time acted like the leader of the church. Unfortunately, Otto left 2 days later and John very quickly reverted back to his old ways. But this time, he made a decision that led to his doom. On February 14, 962, Otto left Rome to deal with the King of Italy, who apparently didn't learn his lesson and wanted to take another stab at expanding his kingdom. As soon as Otto left, John XII tried to go back to his old partying and womanizing ways, but he just couldn't relax. John, perhaps after spending so much time with Otto, finally understood just how powerful Otto really was. John's betrayal was twofold. First, he sent envoys over to the battlefield and hoped to combine his forces in order to form a league against Otto. It was already bad enough that John wanted to raise men against his former ally, but it was the second part of his plan to betray Otto that really showed just how little John cared about loyalty. Pope John XII's next move was shocking, even for him. He entered negotiations with the King of Italy's son, Adalbert, which is the very thing that John promised Otto he would never do. Not only did John completely backstab Otto, but he promised Adalbert the title of Holy Roman Emperor, the title he just gave to Otto. Adalbert rightly hesitated, and while negotiations between him and John stalled, the Pope had no idea that his entire plot was unraveling. Otto soon captured John's envoys, who spilled the beans about the Pope's plans to turn against the newly crowned emperor. Otto, unsurprisingly, was completely taken aback by John's sudden about-face. In a shocking twist, he decided to give John the benefit of the doubt. On top of this, and very luckily for John, Otto was a tad too busy fighting the King of Italy to turn his men around and immediately head for Rome. Instead, Otto sent envoys over to John to set the record straight, and he didn't like what he discovered at all. By the time Otto's men arrived in Rome, John had already managed to let things get worse than before. Not only did John let the Papal States fall into anarchy, but the number of pilgrims visiting Rome completely dried up. At the time, money spent by visiting pilgrims was a huge source of revenue for Rome. John's failure to elevate the sanctity of the church was a huge issue. The people were ready to revolt, and John XII, as far as the envoys could tell, didn't even seem to care. While his people were on the verge of rioting, John gambled, went hunting, and generally partied it up. John's people, now thoroughly tired of his lack of leadership, began to whisper among themselves. Maybe they should let Otto back into Rome, if only to overthrow John. John then proceeded to tell Otto some truly bald-faced lies. The first thing John told Otto was how sorry he was for the entire misunderstanding, even though he definitely wasn't sorry and it definitely wasn't a misunderstanding. Next, he said that he totally changed for the better and was completely reformed thanks to Otto, even though he totally wasn't, and that he planned on turning the whole situation in Rome around. Then, after apologizing for his behavior, John proceeded to attack Otto's character. He accused Otto of failing to fulfill his promise to act in the interest of the Papal States. Otto denied John's accusations, and the news that came back was not good, and it forced Otto to finally turn his sword on John. By 963, John managed to convince Adalbert to enter Rome for the title of the Holy Roman Emperor, and Otto could not ignore this. After achieving a decisive victory over the King of Italy, Otto turned his men and marched them straight for John. Rome was generally a divisive place under Pope John XII, but by this point, the division became a lot more literal. Some of the Romans supported Otto, and very much wanted the emperor to enter the city. These people dug themselves in at a fortified section of Rome. Meanwhile, John and his supporters took up position in a different walled section of Rome. The fracture between his people split John's defenses, and when Otto's men arrived to besiege the city, John didn't last long. When he caught wind of Otto's impending arrival, he folded. He quickly made his escape, but not before committing one last act of blasphemy. As John and Adalbert ran, they made a quick pit stop at St. Peter's Basilica and plundered it of the papal treasury and any other treasures they could carry. After grabbing everything they could, the two hightailed it out of Rome and fled, just in time. Otto arrived in Rome shortly after and summoned a council 3 days later. John was about to be put on trial, and he wasn't going to like the results. Otto and the council deposed him, then a little while later appointed a new pope named Leo VIII. However, as John believed, the people of Rome rose up against the new pope. The Romans did not like the idea of an outsider appointing their officials. Despite everything John did, a revolt in support of him erupted in Rome, setting the stage perfectly for his return. After putting down the rebellions at a huge, bloody cost, Otto soon left Rome, and left Leo behind with just a couple of bodyguards. As soon as Otto left, Pope John XII returned with a huge company of friends and supporters trailing behind him. Seeing this, Leo hightailed it out of Rome, basically laying out the welcome mat for John. John summoned a council of his own. He had every intention of laying down the law and making sure that everyone knew who was in charge. But it turned out to be an embarrassing display of his waning power. He barely managed to get 30 members, and after a rare moment of self-reflection, John amazingly decided to let it go. Sort of. With Otto gone and Leo excommunicated, John let everything in Rome go back to the chaos he preferred and carried on like this for the next 3 months. Then his life came to a sudden and spectacular end. May 14th, 964 marked the last day of John's life on the earthly plane. How he passed is a bit of a mystery, but according to at least one account, John's life did not end at the hands of an assassin or through a political intrigue. Apparently, John's life ended mid-coitus, either because he suffered a stroke during all the excitement or because an angry husband bludgeoned him in a fit of rage. Either way, the way he left was certainly on brand for John. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factionate for more incredible facts about everything.